Oh, I was so Joe and I were trying to remember. I think it was back at Nikon. I know I published an interview with Joe, and it was like I know I published a story of Joe's, and I finally found it. I looked it up, and I think it was like in issue number 8, but I can't remember the title. Now I looked it up a few months ago, and I don't remember the title, but
Death
it
Row
was
Mate.
like yes,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
because I'm
Well,
old and I forget things.
yeah.
everyone here is old.
Yep.
Some older than others, but Mark's
Yeah.
at, Mark's got us all beat by far, I think.
Yeah,
But
I don't
I'm
know. Matt's the
74
oldest fart.
next month. I'm 74 next month.
yeah, you're
That
84, Mark. Is that right?
yes. No, 86 minus 20. I don't know, math hard.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, everyone, welcome back to the Lovecraft eZine podcast. And if you're one of those folks watching live, let me know that you can see me and hear me, see us and hear us. I think there might be some folks watching on Facebook too, so let me know there. And Joe Lansdale is our guest today. Hey, Joe.
Hey, how are you guys again?
Good. Thanks for doing this. Casey emailed
Glad
me,
to.
I guess a month or two back, and I was happy she did. I'm happy to do
Yeah,
this. So
glad to be here. Yeah.
yeah, well, thank you. Let's do quick introductions from you guys, and then let's talk to Joe. Pete, I know you got to duck out early. Why don't you introduce yourself first?
Pete Rawlik, writer and Man About Town.
There you go. Uh, Matt, you got a prize too?
Hi, I'm Matt. I run movie night. We can talk about last night's movie maybe later on the show. Um, there is a prize today. It is a paperback copy of an anthology called Monster Earth, where World War II is, for example, fought with giant kaijus or something. Anyway, if you want to win a copy of this anthology, send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com. Put monster in the subject line. We'll draw a winner in 6, 8 weeks, and so you got plenty of time to get an entry in. And if you enter, maybe a win.
All right. Alan, got you on mute. You're muted. There you go.
Hey, Alan Hughes, artist, teacher, and I work on the eZine website.
And last but not least, Mark Rainey.
Mark Rainey, indeed. Writer, editor, part-time geocacher, and full-time old fart.
Yeah, I bet Joe didn't know he was gonna run into you today. So
I don't know,
No.
but now you know, so get out while you can.
well, John Langan is a panelist too, Joe, whenever he finds the time. And I said, "Are you coming tomorrow?" And he's like, I'm gonna try and make it. And I said, "Okay, so you don't know." So he'll probably show up 10 minutes from now, Don Langan. So yeah, you've got a new collection coming out
Yep,
October the 7th, right?
that's right. Yeah, from
Please.
Tachyon Press, essential horror of Joe R. Lansdale. So
Yeah. Well, I saw your short video on your Facebook page, and it just it comes through for me that this is a very special collection for you.
it is indeed. You know, Tachyon. One reason I've done with them is because they were willing to break some of the short stories up into different anthologies. We did one for crime because things get ugly, which I'm also very proud of. And then we did a Lovecraftian one called at the in the Mad Mountains, and then now
Right.
this one, the Essential. So I'm very excited about these books, and this one especially because I think it comes across my whole career and picks up with the Gothic stuff, the East Texas Gothic, to the more recent stories. You know.
Yeah. Oh, well, also, and most don't know this yet, but there are show notes or show notes, story notes before each
Yes.
story
Yes.
in the collection.
Right.
And that was really great to see as well.
I like that. I mean, I always felt that when I was picking up an anthology, I loved that because it's sort of like somebody meets you at the door and shakes your hand, says, "Hey, come on in. You know, snacks are on the table, and we'll talk."
Yeah. Well, it's a retrospective, which
Yep.
I guess the first obvious question for me would be, you selected these particular stories. I forget how many there are, like 15 or something like that.
Yeah, actually, Rick Claw, my editor, was as much a part of the selection as I was. Some were not included because the book got pretty big, and it's
Mhm.
possible that there will be another book that will contain these other stories. But he and I went over. I said, "Here's some stories I think should be there," and he said, "Here's some stories I think should be there, and here's some that we probably could push out at this point because it's a big, thick book."
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I want to ask you a bit about some other stuff, but I'd like to kind of go over a few of the stories real quick, or at least
Okay.
your notes, because, like I said, it really did come across to me that this is such a special collection for you, and it means a lot to you. So I
Yeah,
want to
it does.
keep a lot of the focus on that. The first story is The Folding Man, and you talk about Ellen Datlow asking
Yes.
you to contribute to Haunted Legends. Quote, the idea was to find some sort of legend, a piece of folklore, and turn it into a modern story. This appealed to me in a big way. I grew up with storytellers. And then you talk about your grandmother.
Hmm.
I wonder if you would continue with that for a minute.
Well, my grandmother, she was Scotch Irish. She was born in the 1880s. She had seen Buffalo Bill's Wild West show
Wow.
when she was a child, or one of the versions of it, because he was with Pawnee Bill and other, but essentially it was Buffalo Bill. And she had seen people land on the moon. And
Yeah.
so she had this long and incredible life. She was nearly 100 years old when she died. And she used to tell me stories, ghost stories that had been handed down to her. And a number of those stories have found their way into my work. The one about this one's based on the whole idea that there's someone that once a year comes around that your children have to be very careful because this person, be they on foot, be they on horse, be they in a wagon, be they in a car, whatever, are out to take those children with them in whatever manner, shape, or form that is. And that was a legend that I heard loosely from her, but I heard it more as I grew up from a variety of different people. And I always thought it was probably a fascinating way to look at, be wary of strangers type of story,
Right.
fable. And so I wrote this story based on that. And the fact I'd worked at an aluminum chair factory had to do with a little bit with the folding man himself, which has a lot to do with the folding aluminum chair idea. Only in this case, it's not. It's a folding man. But I felt like that a kind of a modern take on the old idea made it more fascinating. So that was my whole jump on that story. But my grandmother is responsible. She also told me stories about how there would be, when someone had died, a bird would fly around in the room. They had to open the window and let them out because the bird was from the soul of the person that had died. So she had all these stories about fairies, water witches, stuff like that. She didn't tell them much, and she mainly told them to me because I think a lot of the other kids maybe weren't interested, and maybe she didn't want to tell them around the adults. I don't know, but I got a wealth of knowledge there as well as the rest of my family, who were storytellers.
Yeah. That uh, I smiled at that too, that you mentioned you were pretty much the only one of the grandchildren who was interested in hearing them.
Yeah, it seems to have been. Yeah.
Yeah. So from an early age, you were into stories.
Yeah, I remember all the other kids go out and chase fireflies, and I go chase them a few minutes, and I got to get back to that circle that's sitting under that tree and all those chairs and listen to those great stories that they're telling about the old West, about things from another, that my grandmother stories from Europe, that she had heard, and so I just digested all of that, and it made me happy, and also some of those stories made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up because they had to do with some pretty scary events.
How old were you when this was
Well, it wasn't just 1 year; it was a period of time,
right?
probably from the time I was probably 10 through the time I was 14, 15, something like that. By then, of course, I got a car and I'm out doing things that every other teenager's doing.
Right.
But uh, but I love those stories, and they would sit out there for hours and tell those stories, especially in the spring or in the cool of the evening on a hot summer, because we didn't either. We didn't have air conditioning, and so we would sit outside under this big tree in her yard, and her children, my uncles, a couple of them lived with her, and they were there too to tell stories. And my father was probably the greatest storyteller of all of them when he decided to tell stories. And that was one of the times he did, which was another reason I liked being there, because it was a strong connection to my father, where he wasn't always doing that because he was working, doing this and that, just like the rest of us living our lives and maintaining our family. So
Yeah.
when we had those get-togethers like that after a meal of fried chicken and mashed potatoes and biscuits, the whole Southern, meal. We go out and usually just before dark, and we would talk well into the night, and you start to hear the crickets and the frogs, and it was just a great atmosphere for that kind of thing.
Sounds like it. Your father was a great storyteller. You say I had
Yeah.
read, and tell me if this is wrong, that he couldn't read.
That's right. He couldn't read or write. He got to where he could read a few words here and there and could write his name poorly, but he was a really interesting man, a smart man, and he had all these stories.
Yeah.
And many of them were about him growing up and things that had happened to him, because he was born in 1909. So you got to think about that. Mark Twain didn't die till the next year. Wyatt Earp lived on up into the 1920s, and then you had Annie Oakley and Buffalo Bill. I think might have been 1917 or 1920. I don't remember exactly. And there was Bat Masterson, and all of these people were still alive that were remnants of the Old West and the old frontier. And so he grew up hearing all kinds of stories. And he told me about the first time he ever saw an airplane, because those were just starting to become reality. And it wasn't like people were flying all over the world in them at that point. There were a few barnstormer type things. I think he saw one at a carnival, and it really, really impressed him. And I remember him telling me that cars were relatively new. Well, they were new. Most people then were still riding in wagons and horses and buggies. And there were some cars. The telephone, not many people had telephones. Hell, we didn't have them very often when I was growing up. If we did, we had a damn party line. And a lot of times we'd cancel the phone just to save money.
Yeah.
And so it was a different time for them, and it was a different time for me than the time that people are living now.
There's so many things that you don't even think about. Like there weren't all these telephone wires crisscrossing the sky either.
No,
Planes going
no.
overhead. So
There, in fact, when I was a child in the 50s, they were starting to build the highways as we think of them now, the interstate highways. Eisenhower was doing that. And some people think that's one reason serial killers proliferated, was that they now could get from one place to another very easily. And they weren't part of a community where people go, Billy there's weird, we got to watch him. So you weren't having a lot of that anymore. So there were a lot of things like that. So my life too was even more in the background, because I grew up in East Texas, and a lot of things that other people had, say, in cities or other places up north, we hadn't had them yet. It's sort of like living in the 30s with a few changes, and then gradually those changes accelerated.
probably should have told you I wanted to ask you this ahead of time, but it just makes me want to ask, what are a couple of other of the scarier stories that your grandmother told you and or your father told you during those times?
Well, a lot of the times, my father, the stories he told me weren't ghost stories. They were real stories about things that he had seen, things that even he had done, and things that his relatives had done. And, it would take too long for me to get into one of his stories, because they weren't a punchline. They were stories. And he knew, what I learned from him was how to stray off the trail and go out in the woods and tell you what's going on there and find your way back to the trail up here and not lose the storyline. Now, he didn't. I don't know if I do or not. That's for readers to decide. But I've always liked that better. And it's a difference between a storyteller and an excessive plotter. They can be both to some extent, but a storyteller tells you lies so well you believe them. A plotter, you can sort of feel the mechanisms at work. It doesn't mean it's bad. I love a lot of that too, and I've done some of that. But it's more like clockwork work. It's more like precision work, where storytelling isn't like that. You may be telling a story and all of a sudden old Billy wanders into your story. You remember something about him. Mark Twain, used to have a thing where he would tell a story and he was talking about so and so, and he, in passing, he would mention this guy. He had a dog, and he said, "What was that dog's name? I can't remember that dog's name." And then he'd go, "Okay," and he'd go on and tell the story, and he'd be telling this very banal story until he'd go, "Jasper," because he thought of the dog's name. Well, later.
Right.
So it was the art of storytelling that these people had picked up because it was how they communicated. And I think not being able to read and write, that became even more valuable to someone like my dad, to be able to tell something. So they had a lot of metaphors and similes and things that were outrageous and exciting and interesting. And I grew up in East Texas where that wasn't uncommon to begin with, so I absorbed a lot of that.
Interesting and ironic that you learned some of the art of storytelling from a man who couldn't read or write.
I know it really is, and he always encouraged me to get an education because he knew how hard it would have been for him. And he was in many ways. He even told me once, "I'm ignorant, but I'm not stupid." But he was ignorant in many ways. He believed the world was flat. He believed that nobody had gone to the moon. He had a lot of those older beliefs. He couldn't understand what a germ was or what a calorie was or any of that. And then in other ways, he was extraordinarily wise. In day-to-day life, he was the guy you wanted. And if you ever got in trouble, you wanted him at your back. He was that kind of guy, and was a stand-up guy. But he grew up in a racist time. He was racist in rhetoric, but not in deed. And I think that's one of the things that you have a whole generation now that can't understand that people can be complex, that they're not just one way or another. They're
Right.
a mixture of things. And I think all of these purity tests are stupid because nobody's pure. You want to be around people that are better than you want. I mean, better than you are. You want people that encourage you to be better. But you're a fool if you think there's some sort of person out there who is perfect, or that even if you're hearing a certain amount of perfection, that it's not all necessarily the truth. You don't know.
It makes me think of I was 5 or 6 years old, and I was at one of my I had I had more than three aunts, but my aunt Brenda's house, and it was just her and me, which was nice. I really liked her, and she had HBO, and the Superman 78 movie came on,
Oh yeah.
and so it's right when he notices that Lois Lane's hanging from that helicopter. There he comes out. Clark Kent comes out in his hat and glasses, and then he goes and changes into Superman. And then I remember my aunt going, and she used the N word. Watch what this N word guy says and does, because she thought it was hilarious. But she used that word. It's a terrible word. But
Yeah.
for her,
Yeah.
she was
Yeah.
racist in that sense.
Yeah, and a lot of
Yeah,
times too, the word wasn't even used in a racist manner. When I
right.
was growing up, it's a word we all used. We didn't know any different. We were children, and we thought that was the word. We thought black people, that was their name. That was what you called them. It was white people, and then there was that word for them, and we didn't know any better. And it was people like Mark Twain and my mother, certainly my mother, who was definitely a great influence on me, and To Kill a Mockingbird, things like that opened my eyes to see it as not just a word, but where it came from. But black people use the word all the time. White people they would talk to each other and use the word, even when they were friends, and it wasn't even meant offensively. So now that word, some people see it and they're absolutely want to pull something over their head. And the good side is that we've changed, but the other side is you should not forget the horrors of that time and the way those
Yeah,
black people fought against that and went through that and because they had to put up with a lot of stuff. It isn't like you see in the movies now. Everybody's just gonna put their back up because there was a whole organization of people and politics against you. And so
yeah.
they,
The whole
it was,
system against you
yeah,
as
so
a
it was hard. And those people raised their families. They worked terrible jobs. A lot of times they didn't have the opportunity to move forward like white people had. Even somebody like me was poor. I mean, I come from a poor background, but compared to a lot of the black people that I saw and knew, we were pretty well off, comparatively. And the same with a lot of white people we knew. So even though we were poor, there were people poorer than us, and we never really felt particularly poor because there were so many people in our general level, you know.
Right.
And
Yeah.
to segue a little bit, I ought to say too that the probably the prime reason I became a writer, other than great, you know, hearing great stories, and was that I discovered comic books when I was 4 and got to where I could read when I was 4. You know, I started reading and I wanted to draw and I wanted to write. And I always say I was a brilliant artist. When I was 4, you know, everybody was convinced I was a genius. When I was 6, I wasn't any better. When I was 12, I was still that same artist. So it turned out my mom was lying to me. I wasn't that good. but you know, those things really encouraged me. And then Classics Illustrated Comics, if you know about them, they led me to read novels and short stories and things of that nature. My mother got me a library card very early, got me at the Bookmobile in Mount Enterprise where we were. The library card was for another town where I'd been born. We had to go there, and she would drop me off on Saturdays. I'd go there, then I'd walk over to the Ritz drugstore where you could buy hamburgers and things like that. I'd eat a hamburger, go next door to the movie, the Cozy Theater, and watch a double feature. And I could watch it over and over. They didn't make you leave. So I could watch as many times as it ran. My mom would pick me up or my dad would pick me up and I'd go home and then I'd start reading the books I had the rest of that weekend, you know, that I'd gotten from the library. It was actually a very good life in its own way, you know.
Yeah. Well, I know what you mean about people being complicated, and I was born in Azle. I grew up in Iowa, but I was born in Azle, Texas, and
I know, Hazel.
yeah,
Yeah. James Reasoner's from there. He's a writer.
little northwest of Fort Worth, little town, still is pretty much.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think the thing that us white people, us Caucasian people, and a lot that just never see it is how much they had to fight for what you were born
Yeah.
with, you know?
Just from you know, and it's like my father. He could have this horrible racist rhetoric because he and I used to argue about it, and I'd get upset with him. And then we would go out squirrel hunting because we really, you know, we weren't just going out to hunt. We were going out to eat, you know, and so it wasn't something we were going to die if we didn't go, but if we did go, we were going to eat better that night. And nothing better than a good tree rat fixed correctly. And so we would go out and hunt, but we'd always shoot extra stuff, which he would bring to certain black people that he knew that he was afraid didn't have enough to eat, you know, and he would do stuff, fix their cars for free because he was a mechanic. He did a lot of that, you know, and he was, I mean, he certainly got paid for most of his work, but if somebody needed it, he was there. He did things. So it was like this contradictory,
Right.
complex human being. One doesn't absolve of the other, but one makes the other a little less simplistic.
Yeah. People are complicated.
They are.
Joe Hill, by the way, folks, Joe Hill introduces this
Yeah.
collection, and he alludes to this. I want to quote just a little bit from it. What struck me then was it even clearer to me now is that Lansdale's stories were so radically unlike anything else was doing in the genre. It was like he was painting, deploying an entirely new palette. Other painters were working with blues, with yellows, with reds. Joe was painting with leaded gasoline, shitty beer, ruptured organs, and mother's tears. He was painting. That's great, isn't it? He was painting in shades of fury and scorn. The stories in this book here ring with laughter, but it's a sickened, angry laughter, the disgusted laughter of the man who has watched someone from the Ku Klux Klan light his spotless white robes on fire with his own tiki torch. And I know that I can't remember which story off the top of my head, but you wanted one of the stories in the story notes. You mentioned you wanted to make a statement about racism.
Yes.
In that story.
Yeah, and I didn't just do it in one story. I did it in several,
Sure.
but probably the one that was the most famous. And now a lot of times people are afraid to mention it now because it does use the language of the time. And if I were writing it now about that time, I'd use it again because you want people to know how bad it was. You want people to know how simplistic the views were about the opposite race and and to me, that made it more powerful because it made it more real. And it was the experience I grew up with. So Night They Missed the Horror Show
That's right.
is
That's
still to me probably my best and favorite story of mine because I think it did that. And, the casual reader, the idiot who, needs Cliff Notes and doesn't even know what a Cliff Note is anymore, come to think of it. But, that's not my problem. If you can't understand what that story is about, I don't know what to tell you, because I think it's painted very, very clearly, be it in Mother's Tears or Gasoline or whatever. It was meant to be strong and powerful. And if you write stories that, I don't want to use the word horror because it doesn't have to be horror. It can be crime, it can be mainstream, be literary, all these things I was influenced by. You're supposed to write stories that are challenging sometimes. You're supposed to write stories that are uncomfortable. Horror, what's it about? It's about being uncomfortable. It's not always just some sort of joke twist ending, which I can do, and I've done it quite a bit. I can write all kinds of horror stories because I like all kinds of stories. But those types of stories, and which, I do a lot of, are challenging sometimes. They are uncomfortable sometimes, as is life. And I think with that stories, like people, it shouldn't be about, oh my God, everybody gets offended so easy. It should be that you're out to offend them if you're trying to make things better by that offense. I mean, I'm not out there to just offend people for the hell of it. I don't see any point in that. It's one of the things I didn't like about a lot of splatterpunk, as they called it. Even though I was sometimes labeled that way, I never felt I fit that particular label. Although there were a bunch of us working in different directions then. But a lot of that, just like how gross can I be to be gross, wasn't as interesting to me as how can that grossness, how can whatever you're talking about, dark as it might be, somehow be applicable to the social issues that you're dealing with in life, as well as somehow try to be entertaining on one level because you have to be read. But then again, I think Kafka's entertaining. So it depends on, who's the reader and what they're looking for and what they think.
I want to talk about one of the next stories coming up in the collection. And guys, please, if you got questions or comments, please jump in. But God of the Razor is the next,
Hold
or
on,
the
Mike.
next one after that, something like that. Yeah, go ahead.
So, you talk about literature being uncomfortable, and
Sometimes.
sometimes that like there's this huge debate about To Kill a Mockingbird because it makes some people feel uncomfortable about their past.
Yeah, fuck them.
And
That is your past. That's my past too. And the fact is that we don't want to let go of that past to clean it all up because we'll repeat it.
yes,
We're back. We don't learn a fucking thing from history, from what I can see anyway. Pardon my language if you're offended, but we don't learn that much from history that I can see, and we ought to. And by denying more of that history or trying to clean it up or try to talk about uncomfortable things in a comfortable way, does those people of that time and now, and for what they've achieved, even though they may not even know it, the children may not know it, they don't know.
right.
That is a great injustice, a great injustice.
I'm of the opinion that the whole point of the book is to make you feel uncomfortable.
Yes. Yes. When I read that, I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this is my life. It was a little town, like I lived in a little town much smaller than that one even, but I recognized a lot of that stuff in there, how people lived, how people thought, how people spoke, and what their attitudes were. And, my views had already been changing even as a young person because my mother, I remember one time we went to a theater to watch a movie, and there was another row of people going in the back, and they were all black. And I asked my mom, I said, why are those people going in the back? She said, I don't know. I can't explain it, but it won't always be that way. So,
Wow.
and I was a child that didn't know, I didn't go bing, but it stayed in my head. And then a little bit later, it went bing, along with a lot of other things. And I began to realize that they weren't just going there because they wanted to be on that team. That wasn't what was happening.
Yeah. To Kill a Mockingbird, that's one of my wife's favorite books.
It is my favorite book. It's my
Is it?
favorite book of all time, followed by
Wow.
Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah, she's a high school English
Roof,
teacher.
Roof, hush. That's my dog, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Not you. You don't hush. The dog hush.
Well, actually, we want to listen to you talk more than me, but yeah, she's a high school English teacher, and she teaches that book a lot, and she loves that
Could be.
book.
Well,
Yeah.
I wrote a book about the same subject matter called The Bottoms, and mine, the guy, my main character is not quite as all knowing as Atticus. And she wrote an earlier version go set a watchman that was not an all-knowing Atticus, and in fact, he was much more of a racist kind of guy, at least initially in the book. And she revised it later to become the one that we all know and love. But she was dealing with her, I think, closer to the bone in the other one, and then I think she saw it as a lesson, and it's still dark, but she needed someone to be a knight in shining armor to say, hey, we can be better. This is our better angels here. But I wrote a book called The Bottoms that deals with the same subject matter, but in a different arena and a different time, different people, well, same time, but different people during the Great Depression, because I felt like I had gone through the Great Depression, because my father being born in 1909, my mother, I think 1914, they had gone through all of that. So when you're living with people that are Depression parents, because my dad was 42 when I was born, you're experiencing the echoes of that Depression, and they're pretty loud echoes. They're saving string, they're saving bandages, that these things can make bandages, or we can do this, we may need these pencils, we need 5,000 pencils. Whatever it was, they were saving all this stuff, so it creates an atmosphere that made me feel that I got in touch with that time. So when I wrote my book, and I had read, of course, To Kill a Mockingbird and Huckleberry Finn and a lot of other great books, Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man, all those things, the echoes ran through it. And it's one of those books that's been taught in colleges a little, and sometimes with To Kill a Mockingbird, which makes me happy. So I just want to tell you what the impact that To Kill a Mockingbird had on me.
Yeah.
And it came out of my own expression of things that I wanted to get off my chest, things I wanted to espouse, things I wanted people to look at, things I wanted people to think about. When it won the Edgar, I was very pleased, because I knew some people were reading that dude, and it still sells kind of nicely,
Good. So, God of the Razor is another
Yeah,
story that you picked for Essential
right.
Horror of Joe Lansdale. And this came out in 2007 here. For those
Yeah.
who are just listening later, God of the Razor, the collection. And if you can find it, you should hold on to it.
Yeah.
But the in your I, the God of the Razor in this Essential Horror collection is the first story. And I want to talk about that, but I also want to point out something that you say in the introduction to the God of the Razor collection, is that your favorite God of the Razor story actually is from this Batman
Yes.
collection.
Subway Jack.
Subway Jack. Yeah. I read that, and it was right after the first movie came out, and I saw this. I'd always been a Batman fan. I nabbed it,
Me too.
started reading it. Yeah. Yeah. Casey said that about you. And she said, my dad is Batman. So, but I read that and I thought, man, it just blew me away. And I didn't
Thank
know
you.
who Joe Lansdale was at the time, but I was like, whoever wrote this really knows Batman too.
Yeah.
And just the whole atmosphere, the mood of the story. Um, yeah, you should, if you only, yeah, you should pick this up if you're a Batman fan, certainly, but just it's worth it for just that one story.
Well, the God of the Razor to me was representational for all of the horrible ills and things in our society, and put into something that we could digest easily. So, unlike some of the other stories, I think it's more digestible. It's creepy, but it's more digestible. And the only reason Subway Jack isn't in that is because I don't own the rights to the story, because I did it for the Batman anthology. And
Yeah.
later I wrote for the TV show Batman the Animated Series. And I think that story led to that, my writing for that, and
Oh,
a
wow.
friend of mine, Bob Wayne, worked there, and he put in a good word for me too. But I know the fact that I wrote two stories. I wrote one for the Joker anthology too, and I wrote a Batman novel called Captured by the Engines, Engines, and and a children's book called Terror on the High Skies. It was a Batman story.
Right.
So I think those things that helped lead to me writing for Batman the Animated Series, and I wrote three for that. One for one called Batman and Robin's New Adventures, or New Adventures of Batman and Robin, something like that. And I also wrote for the Superman animated uh, a series. I wrote one of those. I think I got credit for the story on that, or part of the plot, because they gave it to me to. They gave this idea and they couldn't get it to work, and so I wrote a draft. They didn't love all my draft either, but they loved parts of it, so they used parts of it, and that's how I got credit on the Superman. But the Batman, I wrote the scripts based on general ideas they gave me.
Yeah, I see. I did not know that you wrote for the animated series. That's
Yeah,
great.
I also wrote a animated film, Batman film, called Son of Batman, based on the comic Son of Batman.
That's a lot. Even though you don't have the rights to the story, that's a lot of work.
Yeah,
From
and
that one story.
I've done more animation than that. I did one for George Martin not long ago that I think will be released before too long. Well, Vincent D'Onofrio starred in it and directed it. It won some things at like film festivals. LA Film Festival, it got best short. It's 30 minutes, and then I've since then written a full length animated feature that I'm kind of feel like it's going to happen pretty soon. We'll see.
I look forward to it, guys.
Yeah.
You guys got any questions or comments? You want to jump in with anything, Pete?
So, I do a lot of book collecting, and I've got it captured by the engines recently, but also you wrote some MIA.
Yeah, my friend Steve Merch created a series called the MIA Hunter, which was, I guess, the Executioner. He wrote some of those, and so it was a popular series. I didn't like the series, but he said, "Look, I need somebody to help me out here," because he had other people writing it too. I remember Bill Kreider, a friend of mine, wrote some other, and James Reasoner. I can't even give you the list because it's so long. And he said, I need it quick, so I wrote, I think, two of them back to back in 20 days. And then I had a slight break there. And then I wrote another one in 20 days because that's how much time I could give to them for what they paid. But we were able to buy a car. And at that time, we needed that car,
Yeah.
And so I wrote them. And I don't say this with any meanness, but I would get up in the morning and throw up in the toilet before I wrote because they so were not what I wanted to do. It wasn't necessarily anything wrong with them, but they weren't what I wanted to do. And I didn't want to spend my life and career writing MIA hunters because people wanted me to write stuff like that all the time. And I dabbled here and there, but as I went on, I wanted to write my own stuff or to work in worlds that I really wanted to work in, like the Edgar Rice Burroughs world. I finished a Tarzan novel that Edgar Rice Burroughs had not finished. So I could go from things like Tonight They Missed the Horror Show to Tarzan's Lost Adventure to Batman. I wanted to have a life that was as interesting as my reading habits as a writer. I wanted it to be interesting to write in the way that I read, which was across the board.
Yeah, I think what's the first? Is it Pentecostal Punk Rock?
Yeah, there's a story of mine named that. Yeah.
Yeah, that I
That
think
was the one in
Pentecostal
death.
punk
That
rock.
was it. That was the one in death realm. I kept.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you.
Remember.
that is
That
my
was
first
it. Pentecostal punk rock.
That is my first Joe Lansdale, and
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah.
And I keep it because in my mind, it's very, very Lovecraftian.
It is. It is a Lovecraftian story.
Yeah.
And I even considered including it in the Mad Mountains, which is my Lovecraft collection, but it was already pretty full.
Yeah.
And I felt like that I was going to go for the ones that I thought were the most powerful and memorable. And I didn't quite think Pentecostal made the cut, but I don't.
Well,
I'm
I
certainly
liked
not
it.
ashamed of it. Yeah.
I
No,
loved it.
it's a fabulously seductive story.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
just, and it really just, it made me not only search out more copies of Death Realm, but more copies of Joe Lansdale. And I can remember in the 90s walking into a Barnes and Noble and seeing a sign for, I think, the first Hap and Leonard novel.
Yeah.
And
It was probably the second one. They didn't do much for the first one. It was a different publisher, and then Mucho Mojo came along.
Probably, and it like emerging new writer Joe Lansdale, and I'm like, I've been reading Lansdale for like 15 years.
Yeah, I've been around. I've been doing it over 50 years.
Yeah, and then suddenly you're an emerging writer.
Like, yeah.
But
Well, that's
Joe,
good. You get to be new more than once. That's what you want.
yes. Go ahead.
am I remembering right, Joe, that the God of the Razor actually the original story appeared in Grew magazine, Peggy Nudremia's
I
small
think
press magazine? It seems
I
like.
think you are right. I think
And
you are right.
there was a piece of art, and I wished I remember who did that, but the art was the first thing to grab me because that was literally my introduction to you. But I looked at the art, and it was stark black and white, and the character with these shining eyes and the hat, and a gaping mouth and razors coming out to here.
Well, that might have been the cover of the Night Runners. Because
Yeah, well, it was similar. It was similar,
yeah.
but in
It's been so
Gru
long,
there
I
was
don't remember
actually that.
entirely. Yeah.
But once I read that story, that was the day I became a Joe Lansdale
Well,
fan, and
good.
yeah. So
Good.
that you're saying that is the lead-in story of your new book?
Yeah, because I felt like that it was one of the early stories of mine that hit a lot of notes that I
It
continued to
did.
play, perhaps a little differently as time went on. Because when I first started writing stories in the 70s, and I wasn't selling many of them, but they were awful, was one reason. And I had a voice that was not really mine. I didn't know what my voice was. But by the 80s, by the late 70s, really, and the early 80s, I had begun to develop a voice that was closer to my own. And then suddenly I could tell stories. And what happened is I remembered my father's voice and I remembered him telling stories. And it was like a switch turned on.
Yeah. Well, I think, and the story I most recently published of yours, was it? Ghosts in the Cell.
Ghost in the Cells.
Yeah, that was one that it literally starts out like stories around the campfire, and it
Exactly.
has this lovely, homey, familiar feel, and then it goes kind of into this science about if you drill down into the essence of a cell, it will reach a certain primitive level, and then the next thing I mean, almost instantaneously, goes from a quiet, thoughtful, uh, sort of introspective tale to one where a guy's losing his head, and then the head gets punted a goodly distance.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
It just was like the best of all worlds, and
yeah.
I loved reading that one, and I appreciate you doing
Yeah,
that for
it
Death
was
Row.
fun. It was fun. It has a chase sequence, and in a number of my stories, the Folding Man would be one. But that's always been that thing. I don't want something chasing me, and I'm like that old Satchel Paige thing. That you don't ever look back because you don't know what's chasing you. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of a number of my stories. Not all of them by any means, but certainly a number of them is being pursued by something.
Yeah, and that ties into sort of a personal fear of mine. Just a quick anecdote. Several years ago, I was driving with some friends, and we were on what had been a perfectly dry road. It was wintertime, and we got to this curvy part of the mountain, and suddenly it was all ice and snow. And I'm going down this winding, dark road, and the my friends in the back seat are like, they could see the lights, down at the bottom of the mountain, and they're look how high up we are. And I'm like, I don't even want to know how
No, don't say
high
I
that.
up
don't want to
we
look
are,
out.
and then I was thinking at that moment, the only thing that could make this scarier is if something was after me, someone or something is after me, and the next thing I know, there are headlights behind
Oh yeah,
me. That's
it brings to mind
freaking
Richard
freaked me
Matheson's
out.
story "Duel."
Yeah.
Mm.
If you know that story,
By the way, Mark, you're right. Uh, in Essential Horror, all the copyright information. God of the Razor, 1987, first appeared in Gru #5.
Oh
I
yeah.
hope I still have it. I had a flood years ago that wiped out a lot of my older stuff, but I like to think that it's tucked away in my storage
Yeah,
somewhere.
I know I've still got a copy of that magazine in the vault. I didn't throw away any of that old
Yeah, nor
small
did
press
I,
stuff.
but the flood did some of it for me.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Well, I remember thinking when I read Subway Jack, even as a 19-year-old kid, I remember thinking this seems a little Lovecraftian to me. You know, other dimensions, gods coming from another dimension. And my favorite part of the story, if you guys don't mind me reading this real quick, it's a snippet, so DC don't sue me. Uh, where Jim's on the walkie-talkie to Batman, Jim Gordon, he goes, quote, Batman, he's coming up. He's Barrett now. It's like that book says. It's for real. He changes. And then Batman says, I got him, Jim. And Jim thinks to himself, under most circumstances, I would have believed that. I've seen Batman take some weird ones, but this time even Batman may not be enough. And then it goes to Batman. He's thinking about what Jim said, and he experiences something rare for him, and that rare thing is fear. And I just loved, even way back then, about how the immediately his experience and his training takes over as you write in there, and that fear disappears, and he does what he has to do. You
Yeah.
know, so God of the
Yeah, I think the
Razor is,
Necronomicon is even mentioned in that story.
yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I think somewhere in there it is. Yes.
yeah, because this poor kid in the story finds this razor in this book, and he's as
Right.
much of a victim as.
Yeah.
But last time we talked which was several years ago. You talked about what the God of the Razor was, and I wondered if you could do that again and just describe him a little bit and tell the audience who he is.
Well, one thing is that he's an interdimensional creature, and it's almost like our ideas of hell. And I think, and my view of this is where hell comes from, is that it's actually a dimensional place, and that this particular creature, the God of the Razor, is a conglomeration of everything that is evil. He's Jack the Ripper. He's all of it. I mean, he's influential for all of it anyway, even if he's not the specific one. He is the god of all the sharp things. He wears the skins of people because a lot of the Aztec religion and murders and things that they did ritualistically were part of him. And he wears the heads of people. Like he has like hooves instead of feet, and he sticks those down into the heads like shoes. And
Right.
so he's kind of all of these different cults, these different religions, these different dark things, all wound up into a guy with a top hat. And he's dark in an obsidian colored way. He's like stone in some ways, and he's a creepy dude, and he has different manifestations, but he carries a giant razor. And if you get cut by that razor, it's like being bitten by a vampire. It's carrying on that legacy. It has different um, aspects to it, just like vampire stories have different aspects.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always do exactly the same thing, but it certainly is part of his methodology.
Am I remembering right where in Night Runners he's more ambiguous, but then when you wrote the God of
Yeah.
the short story, it's as you said, you put him on more solid footing that he's
Yeah,
real.
the in the novel, which is where he first appeared, he is in many ways a manifestation of the way that the young killer thinks, and so this is his representative of all this. So in some ways, even though he's right up front, murderous and whatever, there's probably a little bit of a barrier in there that allows him to say, "Look, I can't help myself. This is my controlling element is this God of the Razor." And later on, when I couldn't sell the novel originally, I took a lot of different pieces out of it and turned them into stories that inspired different stories. They weren't all literal. Boys Will Be Boys is pretty literally from the novel. But what I did was that I said, well, what if it was a real thing and not just a subjective thing? Although it hints in the novel that it might be real. But and so the guy with the razor became a somewhat different character in a series of short stories. There are quite a few short stories about him. I'm not sure exactly how many, but they've grown over the years. And I probably will write another if I live long enough.
Good. Uh, tight little stitches in a dead man's back.
Yeah.
In your story notes for this one, you write, this is probably the first of my stories that really got noticed, which
Yep.
then led to previous stories being recognized. And then you go on to talk about your wife had a full-time job and you weren't making much. You didn't want to
Yeah.
go back to being a janitor. And I think that's a struggle that so many creative people can identify with.
Yeah.
I wonder if you'd elaborate on that a little bit or talk about it a little bit more.
On the struggle part?
Well, you're not to put a too fine of a point on it, you're a very successful writer. And then people saying, look, hey, Joe Lansdale went through this too,
Yeah.
is
Well,
inspiring.
yeah. I mean, I was at that point where I'd gone full time in 1981. I sold my first piece when I was 21, which was just a little article with my mother, actually. And then I sold a few articles here and there. And then I began to sell some short stories to Mike Shane Mystery Magazine. But by 1981, when I was 29, I went full time, and I had sold a couple of novels. Things looked good. I had some ghost work I was doing, and some money coming in. And no sooner had I started, and even though I had this money in the background, which is why my wife said you need to quit and go to work full time. Um, Suddenly, the other couple of books I had, like The Night Runners and Dead in the West, which is just a fun pulp novel, they weren't selling.
Yeah.
And then I wrote a number of short stories. They weren't selling. And so I was just having a short story here and there. And it looked like I was going to have to go back to work doing other stuff. And this particular story I was asked to write for an anthology. And I said, okay, it was called Nukes. And the idea was all of the writers in it wrote about, nuclear war and the things that it brought. And I thought, well, I'm going to do it not so much from a realistic standpoint, but from the old 1950s movies standpoint. Things like Day of the Triffids I'm blanking now, but there were tons of those kinds of movies in the 50s. And so I was influenced by them because, even with a nuclear blast, in a short time, you're not going to have transformations of creatures into giant species and stuff. But I love that idea. And I also thought it was a chance to write something that was a little bit literary, which was also an influence of mine, things I'd love to read. And so I believe that I sort of welded that all together, and my frustration at worrying about going back to work. My son, we had just had my son Keith. Casey wasn't born till years later, but I felt like, I'm taking care of him at home and I'm writing, and I really don't want that to change. But I wrote that story. I didn't get paid a ton of money, but it got out there and it got a lot of attention. And at the same time, it was leading to people going, "Who is this guy?" And so that began to help me with the old stories and led to novels that I was able to sell, like The Magic Wagon and The Drive-In, and later the Night Runners. The Night Runners actually, I think, because of Tight Little Stitches, was noticed. People said, "Well, I got this novel I haven't been able to sell. I think it's powerful. I think it's good." And I'd written it in 1983, and I couldn't sell it. And I think I just a lot of doors begin to open because of that story. So I have a special feeling for it.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the only story I've written that I have special feelings for, but I have a unique position that I put that on the shelf with.
You mentioned something a minute ago too, and in passing, you said that your wife, Karen, said you
Yeah.
need to quit
Yep.
and do this full time.
Yep.
There are plenty of wives who wouldn't be that way, plenty of spouses who would not be that way, would in fact be the opposite. And it being creative and making a living at it is hard work. It's
Yeah.
rewarding, but to have someone supporting you makes all the difference.
Yeah, she
Who
was working
believes
as
in
a
you.
fire department dispatcher then.
Mm,
She did that. She was like 24/7 on 24 off 7.
yeah.
And I said, well, I remember saying, honey, I don't think we can afford that. She said, we're going to afford it. Said, you're there. It's going to happen. This is what you're meant to do. And,
Wow.
I'd always had jobs and worked together. And she encouraged me to go on and keep writing and to believe in myself, which I believed in myself pretty good. But if she believed in me, that meant more to me.
Yeah.
She made me want to be a better person all the time. And so when she encouraged me, I was able to dive in deeper, and dive in deeper, not only in myself. I think I began to write the kind of special kinds of stories then, and I began to write stories that were more unique and more my own voice. And also, a few years later, excuse me, I started doing so well that she could quit her job, and she went to work for me and worked for me for up until she was in her 60s. She has Alzheimer's now, so it's changed, the situation for her.
Yeah.
And but up until that point, she went to work for me. She handled all the business. She handled initially my daughter's singing business because my daughter's a singer and songwriter, and she writes books and stories. But
Casey's on my playlist.
yeah, oh, good, yeah. And so it was. I owe my wife a lot. And back when I was in my early 20s, I was working in the rose fields. I was doing farm labor, and we had our own little farm and a goat dairy and all that. And then we had a winter that things were so bad that we couldn't, outside of just taking care of the animals and selling milk and whatever, we couldn't do much. My wife got a job then at Southland Corporation loading lunch meats and cheeses and things into these big refrigeration trucks that carried it to 7-Elevens and things like that. And she said, well, I got a job now. And since the weather's bad, I want you to stay home. You take 90 days, take 3 months is what she actually said. Take 3 months off and write. But when I come home, you better have something written. And I was also scared of that woman. So I would write a short story a day. I wrote 90 stories in 90 days. And most of them were awful. But what happens, I was able to get the junk out of my system. I was able to get rid of all the ideas that I was cobbling and revising and redoing. But I didn't lose the better influences of those things. And those stories went out. And over a 4-year period, because back then we did it by mail, it was slower, but there were also a lot more markets, 10, 15 markets per story. I got 1,000 rejects, literally. We used to joke about being able to really, put them all on the wall and cover the room in wallpaper of rejects. And later on, I took most of those stories and stacked them up and burned them when we moved back to Nacogdoches. And I kept a handful of them, and I sold every one of them later on, and it wasn't because I had a big reputation. It's because the handful I kept were fairly decent. And then later I did a book based on all my old stories, had a lot of autobiographical material in it as well. And so I printed the stories that I had left. I had more than I thought. And I wrote little autobiographical clips to show, look, everybody starts out somewhere. And this is where I started out. But also they did a special edition in which we put the rejects, put a reject in each one of those, And so I appreciate what she did for me then and what she did for me later, because it changed my career. It gave me a career. And I never, ever once had her say, maybe you ought to do something else, or maybe you ought not do this, or whatever. She was there for me when I wasn't there for me, so I give her all the credit.
Well, I have this great 30 years ago, I met you and Karen at Atlanta, maybe Dragon Con or World Horror.
Probably World Horror, more likely. Yeah.
And I went to get 2 copies of the book club of Midnight Graffiti signed. And she reached out and she touched you on the arm and she nodded her head. She shook her head. And I was like, what's going on? She's like, Joe never signed a contract for a book club. Like,
no,
she knew exactly what you were contracted for. And
right. We straightened that out, by the way.
and like, I ended up having, she asked if I had 2 copies and she asked if she could have one. And she gave me your address. I still have it in Nacogdoches. And then she sent me a copy of the Magic Wagon, the slipcase.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. And
Nice.
Our address is different now, by the way. So that wouldn't be. Yeah, she was the best, and she still is. I mean, she's lost in the mire of Alzheimer's, which is just so painful. Because I think about what a sharp mind she had and all she did for me. And we really did have a love story, and we've been married 52 years, and 50 of that, we were still able to connect and what have you. But now it's really changed,
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
it's going to be really hard.
I got to
go, Pete. Thanks for being here, Pete.
I'll talk to you guys later. Nice to see you, Joe.
Oh, yeah,
are you going to tour?
I'm not this time. I've done a couple of things. I'm going to do Poison Pen. I did Murder by the Book, but no, I'm not really doing a tour this time for a lot of reasons.
A couple of years ago, you came to Murder on the Beach in Palm Beach County.
That's right. That was fun.
That was fun. So yeah. All right.
See you, Pete. Thanks.
You guys.
Well,
See you,
I
Pete.
think-
Joe, I couldn't let that sentence pass because my wife is exactly the same way, and she's always been supportive of everything creatively crazy that I want to do. And yeah, I'd have a real hard time doing it if it wasn't for her.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you don't have that kind of support, no matter, male, female, whatever your supportive person is, be it spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend,
Yeah.
you can't do it.
And
Or
it's
you
it's not
can do it. You can do it.
yeah. It's
But
not grudging support. It's
yes,
yeah, you know what I mean?
yes, full support.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I was never like, yeah, well, you're my husband. Never was like that at all.
Right.
Like I said, she was always there for me, and I'll appreciate that to the day I die.
My wife is very supportive until she reads something that I wrote.
Well, my wife didn't always like what I wrote. I'll say that right up. Excuse me, I got a little sniffle here.
Oh no, you're fine.
Yeah.
The Bleeding Shadow is another story that you included in here, and I was
Yeah.
looking at your story notes on this one. One of the things you talk about is Robert Johnson, and you say Robert Johnson or Johnson's story also reminded me for some reason of Lovecraft's eXine.
Yeah.
Something in his music holds one of Lovecraft's creepy monsters at bay, keeps it on the other side of the veil. I combined the two ideas, added in a lot of me, and away the story went. We talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. Well, I've always been a big fan of blues music, and of course, Robert Johnson has that great story about selling his soul to the devil,
Right.
and so there's all these, and there's another guy too that kind of influenced that a lot of people don't know is Henry Ragtime Thomas, Texas Henry Ragtime Thomas, who did like Bulldozer Blues. I mean, if you hear Going Up Country by Canned Heat, that's actually the Bulldozer Blues revised, and even the little whistle in there was he played that out of the corner of his mouth while he played on the guitar. And nobody really knows what happened to him. He just sort of disappeared at some point. I went and actually did some research and tried to find people that had existed at that time when he was there or had stories handed down. They knew nothing about him. Even his relatives know nothing about him. They're not even, I don't think they even knew they were relatives. And this guy impacted music from everybody from Bob Dylan and so on. So that was part of that story, was all of these particular musicians that had been around that had somehow gotten some credit later. I think Henry Thomas deserves a lot more. But I thought this is a way for me to take their stories, the things that happened to them and the things that people claim happened to them, and try to do something interesting with it and tie it to the Lovecraftian idea of eXine, who played, I think it was like a violin to keep the monsters at bay. And it was also a way to touch on the Black culture that I grew up around and the South that I grew up around. And I placed it in the 50s, which was the time that I was a child then. I remember the late 50s and 60s better than the early, obviously, being born in 51. Now, it's not like I got a tremendous amount of memory there, but I got a lot more than a lot of people my age. And I'm not sure why I've retained a lot of that. But I just combined all of that and tried to write in a style that I thought was comfortable to the point of finally becoming so real that it affected the reader. Because if you can write interesting characters, that's the center of the story, and the center will hold no matter how outrageous you get all the way around.
I saw somewhere you wrote "Write like everyone you know is dead."
Yes, that's my motto.
Yeah, well, extrapolate on that a little bit. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, sometimes people take that meaning I don't care what the reader thinks, but when I'm writing, I don't care what the reader thinks. My friend Neil Barrett had a saying was like "fuck the reader," and mine is "Write like everybody you know is dead." And the reason you do that is otherwise you're writing for people. Have things somebody's looking over your shoulder, or you're worried about what my wife thinks, and she never would have wanted me to do that.
Yeah.
And you're worried about what your agent would think, what your editor would think, what this group of friends would think. And the bottom line is, if you do that, and there are some people that I think have the knack to do that, and want to do that. I think I'm just so ornery that I don't want to do that, first of all. But second of all, I don't feel like I would write honestly because I'm worried about what other people are thinking. Whether I'm writing something that's just whimsical or I'm writing something that's dark, it matters to me that it's mine and I'm not trying to write somebody else's story. Now, when I get finished with it, I hope like hell somebody loves it. And if he goes to the editor and they have some suggestions, I'm always listening, because I might agree and I might not. And the proofreader, of course, they help you quit not look like an idiot, although sometimes I disagree with them as well. But the point is you have to write for yourself first, I believe, or at least I do, before I can write a story that I care about and that will have some sort of echo to the reader.
By the way, in Joe Hill's introduction, I had to smile at this. One afternoon, my dad said, check this one out, and tossed me a slim paperback copy of The Drive-In. He was 13. I pounded it down in a single day, one sitting, something I've only done with 3 other books. I don't know who Joe Hill's dad is, but that's a neat
Yeah,
story.
who knows,
Yeah.
right? It's a good
Someone
story.
discerning, though.
Yeah.
Bubba Ho-Tep is in here, too.
Yeah. One of my more well-known stories because of the film.
Right.
It was a story I didn't think could be filmed, and I tried to talk Don out of optioning it, and he did anyway. And then when he came up for re-option, I thought, okay, I warned you, so I'll take that option. And
Yeah.
so he did it, and he asked me if I want to do the screenplay, but frankly, wasn't paying enough because he didn't have a lot, and I was also a writer's. I was trying to get in the Writers Guild at that point. I don't think I was yet, but I was wanting to do it because I'd written a couple of screenplays that I'd gotten permission to write off the books, so I did it legally. But I was wanting to join the Writers Guild, and I didn't want to do it for the amount of money that he was offering because I didn't think it could be made was the main reason. I just didn't think that would work. And then he wrote a screenplay, and damn if it didn't work. And
It
I
sure
had a
as hell
few
did.
suggestions, and then Bruce had the same suggestions, and I think he listened when Bruce had the same suggestions. And I always joke about that. But Don wrote a great screenplay, and I thought, I was wrong. This thing can be filmed. And then when I saw the film, and I got the rare and wonderful chance of seeing it before it was released in the wild at Alamo Drafthouse in Austin, and I saw it, and I went, wow, this is special. This is unique. This is me, and this is Don, and this is Bruce, and this is Ossie. It's all of us. We
Yeah.
all brought something of ourselves to this.
It is absolutely a gem of a film.
I think so.
It
Yeah.
really is.
Joe, did you write the screenplay to Cold in July?
I wrote an original screenplay to Cold in July many years ago for John Irvin, who did Ghost Story and a bunch of other things like that. Really good guy. And we had it for 7 years, or he had it for 7 years. And they then started wanting me to rewrite this, rewrite that. And finally, the screenplay that I had was just so awful. I said, I'm out. I'm done. I'm not doing another thing. Taught me a big lesson. And also, what's funny is that how I got that screenplay is Richard Matheson told me. He said, if you want to break in the film business, if they option something of yours like that, tell them that you want to do the screenplay, and said make that a prerequisite. Well, I was willing to bend if they didn't want me to do it, but I was all prepared to do it. And when I went in, the first thing John said to me, he said, "Bob, glad to meet you." So, by the way, you want to do the screenplay? I went, "Yep." So I made a lot of money off of it, but by the time it was the last screenplay, the original one is somewhere in some of my records, probably on disc from those computers when we had disc. And but later on, Nick D'Amici wrote the screenplay, and I like his screenplay. Yeah,
Yeah, I couldn't remember. It's been a while since Kim and I
yeah.
watched the movie, and I could not remember
It's a
whether
good
you had
movie.
actually
I'm
done the
very happy
screenplay.
with
Yeah,
it. I
I
think
thought,
it and
yeah,
Bubba
it
are
worked
very, very
nicely.
close, and the Happen Leonard series are close. And Don did Incident on and off a mountain road for Masters of Horror, and it's very close. So, I got no complaints with those guys. Some of the other stuff I'm not quite as happy with, but and also Love, Death, and Robots did me proud with the 3 stories of mine they adapted. Creep Show was a little mixed, but and some other things here and there. And then they did The Thicket, which is a pretty good movie, but I felt like they missed a lot of what would have made it a better movie, which was my book.
Well, in your story notes, I wonder if you'd tell this real quick, or you talk about where going to see Guy Davis perform and your
Yes.
daughter Casey perform, and you were wearing a Bubba Ho-Tep t-shirt.
Right. I was
So
wearing a
yeah,
Bubba Ho-Tep t-shirt, and he saw me and he said, "I love my dad in that." And that's the first time it rang to me that that was Ossie Davis' son. And he said, "I'm gonna get a picture." And we got a picture. I'm send it to Mom. And I thought, "Oh man, another great
that's
actress."
that's great.
But yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's I just can say it again. That's such a gem of a movie. I love that movie.
It started out as just people didn't know what to think, and it was became a cult classic, and now it's kind of accepted as like regular cinema. You see it shows everywhere. It's I think it's on Tubi right now. I'm not sure, but it's on one of those stations. It may be Tubi, along with The Thicket, which is Peter Dinklage and Juliette Lewis, who starred in my that version of adaptation of my novel, The Thicket. And it's a good film, and they're both fantastic in it. I just, like I said, because I'm the writer, I want a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that.
They certainly did great with the casting of Elvis. I'll tell you. I'm
Yeah.
glad he did. I'm glad he said yes.
Oh yeah,
So
me too, me too. I love Bruce. He's a really swell person. He's a good man.
yeah, I was on an interview with him one time, and it got to be turned to ask my question, and I asked him, was he into Lovecraft growing up? Because we were talking about the TV series um, at the time that he did. Um, what was the name of that? I'm
I'm not sure
blanking on.
which one you're talking about.
I'm talking about the one based on the Evil Dead.
Ash
Oh,
versus Evil
yeah,
Dead.
The Evil Dead.
Ash
Yeah,
versus the
yeah,
Evil Dead. Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. Yeah, thanks, Alan.
Oh, the TV series. Sure, sure, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's like, he laughed and he said, no, it was Sam Raimi was the one who was into all that. But yeah, I can't imagine that movie being nearly as good as it is without Ossie Davis and
Oh yeah.
and him. Yeah,
Oh yeah, and I was such a fan of Ossie Davis. I was one of those rare moments when I felt a little starstruck. And that hadn't
yeah,
happened to me. And it's usually with writers, like I knew Robert Bloch some when I first met him, Richard Matheson, Ray Bradbury. All these writers I at least met, and some I knew a little bit.
yeah.
And then William F. Nolan became a real dear friend. I mean, all these people I kind of was impressed because they were the people who taught me how to write among a number of others, but that was special for me.
Uh, you guys have any questions for Joe?
I got one, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah,
please.
I love the weird westerns.
yeah,
Zeppelin
thanks.
West. Yeah, Buffalo Bill's Head in the Jar.
Yeah, Zeppelin's West. Yeah, yeah.
Is there
Flaming London and
is there room
Sky
for
Done Rip.
is there room for a Weird West collection from you from some of your?
There is kind of one called Dead Man's Road, but they're all about my character from Dead in the West. Dead in the West, the novel, the short novels included, and there's all these stories about him. And there are a couple of loose stories that haven't been collected. Plus, I wrote other Weird West stories that have appeared here and there. And at some point, I thought about it might be cool to get them all collected, and I'd like to write others. And, my son worked on a Weird West film. He was one of the screenwriters on The Pale Door. And they had Weird West theme too, the West and witches, you know. So I guess it's carried down. He never really had a great interest in Westerns, I think, until recently.
Yeah,
Have,
Alan, the Hoodoo Man on the Midnight Train is in Essential Horror.
Yes, and also The Hungry Snow, I think, is in there
Right,
too.
right.
Those are both weird westerns.
Yeah.
what kind of reaction do you get from Western writers for your?
Well, I won the Spur a few years ago for Paradise Sky, which is, I think, my best novel, and it's a historical western. Also got a lot of it won the Spur for the best historical western. It got a lot of acclaim from a lot of historical sources and things like that. So I don't think they mind it when I veer and write weird westerns.
You write in here, there's a Fish Night is in here, and you write,
Yes,
this is possibly my first truly good short story.
right.
I was wondering if you talk about that for a minute.
Well, I was writing stories for these anthologies that at that time was a friend of mine. We kind of lost connection over the years, but Bill Pronzini, a very good writer, very good editor, and he actually said, "Okay, let me give you a shot." And the first one I did was a mummy story called The Princess, which isn't particularly great. and it didn't have me in it much. And I wrote another one called Wazia, which is a kind of Bigfoot story, which is a better one, but still not quite it. And then in this other, these are two different anthologies. This other third anthology I wrote, it was called Ghost. And I thought, what if the ghost of prehistoric fish existed? And the whole story came out, and there's a lot of Bradbury feel to it, but it was the first good story I had written, and it had an originality and a darkness that I think fit the kind of stories that I would later on write more of.
Yeah. Now I know nothing about martial arts, but I wanted to veer off track from this book for a second. And you're a grandmaster of martial arts, if
Right.
I'm understanding this correctly. And I wish Langan was here to ask this. He texted me and said sorry he couldn't make it, by the way.
Yeah.
But you have your own martial art that you created. Can you
It's
talk
true.
about that a little bit?
Yeah, it wasn't even intentional to happen. It's just that over the years, I'd studied so many different martial arts that when I was teaching, it started being pointed out that I wasn't teaching any particular one art, and I never was, I don't feel like I owe any allegiance to that sort of thing. I owe allegiance to what works and what's effective. And so over time, I would go to these different seminars with other, with grandmasters and stuff. And a number of people just say, hey, man, what you're doing is pretty outstanding. You ought to form your own system. And a friend of mine, Eugene Frizzell, felt that I should do that, and he pushed me to do it nicely. And so eventually I did, and I formed it, and it's in the United States Martial Arts Hall of Fame now, and I am too, of course. And then it would the International Martial Arts Hall of Fame. I was recognized for a number of things there too. So it had that kind of validation, and I have ranks in a number of systems, and I've studied aspects of others from everything from judo to aikido to kickboxing to kempo to boxing, wrestling. My father taught me boxing and wrestling when I was 11. He was my original teacher, and I was terrible, but I learned because I wanted to learn. And so I've been doing it all my life. I mean, to make a long story short, I've studied Hapkido. I've studied every kind of martial art that I had opportunities to study, some more than others and longer than others. But I just it's a big part of who I am, to tell you the truth, a big part.
Well, and you had to learn to defend yourself.
Yeah, I grew up in Gladewater, Texas. Well, I was born in Gladewater, Texas, moved to Mount Enterprise. But when we moved back, I was the new kid, and I was a reading kid, and I was never, in a sense, truly bullied, but they tried to bully me. But even I would always fight back, even if I lost early on. They thought, maybe that wasn't worth it because he would be biting your ankles or whatever. And then I started training. Then it got to where a few people tried that, and it didn't work out for them. And then after that, people left me alone. And so I was also popular. I was unusual for a lot of writers. I hear their stories, and mine wasn't like that. I was someone who read a lot. I was someone who was, I guess, intellectual and interested in scholarship. I was not someone who ended up getting a college education. I took some courses. I had about 60 hours over a period of time. Of course, I obviously had a high school education, but I taught myself. And I taught myself in a way. I actually had mentors, those people I mentioned earlier, Block, Bradbury, you name it, all those, Flannery O'Connor, Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Steinbeck, Harper Lee, Mark Twain, Jack London, Robert Louis Stevenson, Rudyard Kipling. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But all of those were at the early beginnings of it, and they were my mentors. But they were better mentors, I think, than going to college. And at that time, when I went to the University of Texas a little while, there weren't available to me creative writing courses. And I look back, and even though I've taught creative writing courses and I'll be teaching some next year, I'm not so sure that you can teach people writing. I think you can encourage somebody that has that spark, who has that personal experience, to do better and to be a better writer. But I don't know that you can actually teach somebody to write. Some of the worst writers that I've encountered they actually understand grammar and all that stuff just perfectly, but there's no personality to it. It's just there, and once in a while you'll find somebody that doesn't have a lot of education in the classic sense, but they have a lot of gut instinct, which really is, there's no true such thing as gut instinct. It's learned. It's your subconscious, but some people have that subconscious training, and some people don't. I write almost entirely from the subconscious. Most of the stuff I do, I dream it at night. I get up the next morning, I write. I don't have writer's block. I have some days when things go better than others, but I write every morning for about 3 hours. That's all I do, and I do it about 7 days a week, unless something comes along that just knocks me off the rail, where I have to do something else. And I do 3 to 5 pages a day. And if some days I get 10 or 15, I'm excited, but I always get it within those 3 hours, it seems, for somewhat weird reason. And in a bizarre change, every now and then I'll go work in an afternoon or in an evening as well. But that's rare. I usually just don't need to. And if you look at the amount of work I've done, that methodology works for me. I'm not saying it's the one that should work for everybody else, but I get diminishing returns. Dean Koontz once told me he built sort of like a train, like a steam engine train, and that it took him all day to get where he wanted to be. And in the morning I wake up ready to go, and then for me it's downhill after that. My train's going downhill.
So everyone, in the show notes, I've got a link to The Essential Horror of Joe R. Lansdale on Amazon. And let me say for the millionth time that pre-orders mean so much to writers and publishers and editors. And so if look, I got to have this book, then go ahead and pre-order it, because that really helps.
Right. Right. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention The End of the World as We Know It, since I'm in that. It's a big anthology based on Stephen King's The Stand that has a tremendous number of authors in it. And I feel like that I should also promote that too, since it's out right now. And it was edited by Brian Keene and Christopher Golan.
Yep. Yeah, it's doing very well from what I hear.
It's on the bestseller list, number 3, I think.
Yeah. You guys have any other questions that you'd like to ask Joe?
It departs a little from the traditional writing discussion, but I want to see if Joe remembers this.
All right.
Back about 88 or 89, there was a small convention in Greensboro in North Carolina called StellarCon. And it was usually science fiction based, but that one year they had a bunch of horror guests. You were there, and Dennis Etchison, Skip Inspector, Lisa Cantrell. Who else? I think
was Carl
maybe
Wagner there.
Yes, Carl was there. Yeah, absolutely. But if I'm remembering this right, and I know you have a good memory for things, I introduced you to sushi because we went out for dinner that
it was the first
night.
time I ever had sushi. And
That's what I would. Yes, that
the
exactly.
The only thing I did wrong is I got hold of that wasabi. I thought it was a mint.
It got you.
Damn near killed me.
It got you. Yes,
it damn near killed me. But I thought, this is amazing. I've been missing this all my life because
my question is, do you still like sushi after all that?
I do. In fact, I had some the other night that my son-in-law made. And we're going out to a sushi restaurant here in a couple of weeks with my film agent. And but I love sushi. Adore it.
Oh, good. There was I forget the restaurant at the moment, but anyway, they were one of the few around that had the Tobiko, the flying fish eggs with a raw quail egg on top.
I love that.
Everybody got the Tobiko with the raw quail egg, and I loved it, but most people had not tried it before. And the table next door to us, as soon as we started picking up that stuff, they all started going, go, and we were all popping that. Yeah. Oh my God, that was good stuff. I remember
all that. Yeah, I remember.
Oh yeah. That was fun stuff. And I was thinking that was your first. That was your introduction to sushi.
I'd never, because people always said it was bait. Don't eat that.
Yeah.
And I thought, no, I'm going to try this. The Japanese seem to have done pretty well eating it, so I think I can give it a go, and it's one of my favorite foods.
Yeah. So anyway, I figured that was an anecdote of no small amusement.
Well, I have a question then, Mark. Why did you try to kill Joe?
Yeah.
because he had written God of the Razor and it scared the fuck out of me.
So you had to scare him.
Yeah, something had to scare him.
Oh, and I should mention the Mad Mountains. That's your Lovecraft stories.
Yeah.
Was out what, a year or two ago, something
A
like
year
that.
ago, yeah.
Yeah, Alan.
Yeah.
Alan's got it right there.
Right there. That
Yeah,
collection.
that's it. Right. I
So
love
while
that book. That cover, by Mignola is just fabulous.
Yeah.
Is that out in audiobook? Do you know?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, speaking of covers, who did the cover for Essential Horror? Because I love that cover.
Boy, I'm going to forget. And I did a
Maybe it's
story
in
based
there.
on one of his paintings once, and I'm having a blank right now.
It's probably on the.
It is.
Well, I don't know if they can see it from here, but that's what the cover looks like. Everyone.
Yeah.
Great cover. Let's see.
King.
I don't think it's released yet, though. It's like
Yeah. No, but it's the cover was done by Coyne. I can't remember his first name right now. I'm having a blank.
Yeah, I can't find it here, but yeah, I'd say it's a great cover. But yeah, while you're waiting for Essential Horror, guys, you can pick up Mad Mountains.
That's right.
So yeah.
Now I'm doing a lot of audiobooks, and I was just looking at some of the ones you've got available here. You got the Drive-In, you've got the Bubba Ho-Tep dramatized adaptation, Bleeding Shadows.
I saw that the other day. I picked that up. Yeah.
I've got it in the bottoms. Oh my God. Yeah, because my eyes are shit anymore. I can't read but so long at a time, so I listen to a lot of audiobooks.
My kids listen to audiobooks, especially when they're driving and doing different things. That's a big part of their reading is actually audiobooks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Joe, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Appreciate everybody, and we'll do it again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do that. And tell Casey you said hello.
I will.
And thanks, everybody. You have a prize, Matt, before we go?
Yes, I do. If you remember, you could win a copy of Monster Earth. Just send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com. Put Monster in the subject line. It'll be 6 to 8 weeks before we draw a winner, so you have plenty of time. And if you are at all interested and you live on the West Coast, I would encourage you to go to the Lovecraft Film Festival, which starts on the 19th of September in Portland, Oregon. If you can't make it, why don't you go to their website and look into the streaming package? The first week in December, you can stream all the short subjects and stuff, so it's well worth it.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. I've got to run. My pit bull has decided he needs to go out.
No problem. We're running too. Have a great day.
So good to see you, Joe.
You too.
Thanks, everybody.